He ordered more bloodthirsty spectacles, and to the horror of the Senate, he even joined in, killing a gladiator in a mock fight.
Once, when he and a Murmillo from the gladiatorial school had been having a fight with wooden swords and the latter deliberately fell to the ground, he ran the man through with a real dagger.
1 year into his reign, Caligula was showing a mania for self-indulgence. Guests to his dinner parties were presented with food made of gold, while the emperor drank pearls dissolved in vinegar. His sexual appetite has gained lasting notoriety. Caligula demanded sex from prisoners, senators, and members of his family.
He habitually indulged in incestuous relations with all his sisters, and at a crowded banquet he would make them take turns in lying beneath him, while his wife lay above.
When Drusilla, his favorite sister, died in 38 AD, Caligula declared her a goddess. He placed her statue in the Temple of Venus, goddess of love. Caligula was obsessed by women he could not have.
We don't know whether he was really particularly highly sexed, but what we do know is that he liked summoning women away from their husbands, debauching them, and then returning them. This is clearly a power thing.
After his first wife died in childbirth, Caligula snatched his second wife at her wedding to another man. He divorced her within weeks. His third wife was married too. The emperor forced her husband to give her away. But in his fourth wife, Caesonia, Caligula found his soulmate. She was promiscuous and extravagant. Caligula was delighted, parading her naked in front of his friends. But even she was not safe. When Caligula kissed her neck, he told her he could cut it whenever he wanted. She bore him his only child, Drusilla, named after his sister. Less than 2 years after his ecstatic reception, the emperor's behavior was causing alarm in the Senate. By early AD 39, there were stirrings of resistance. Caligula's response was to unleash terror. Marching into the Senate, he branded them hypocrites who turned against Tiberius and would turn against him. Now he revealed he'd kept copies of lists of his family's enemies, despite his promise. There was panic as he accused everyone of involvement in his family's deaths.
Caligula's attitude towards the Senate was one of complete contempt. Now the gloves are completely off. The facade of a Roman emperor who takes advice and listens to his Senate is well and truly over.
Terrified, the Senate agreed to a resumption of the treason trials.
It's a stage in his deterioration, a very, very marked stage, and I think a fatal one, because you couldn't do without the Senate. You might kill X number of senators, and his successor killed a number of senators too, but you can't do without the Senate as a whole, and he alienated them.
Caligula's purge was indiscriminate. Throughout his reign, the emperor took a keen interest in inflicting death. He issued precise instructions. Prisoners should be killed slowly by a series of small cuts. Executioners were told victims must feel their deaths.
Caligula's evil shows in his desire to make people suffer. We're told that he was torturing a man for so long that his brains began to putrefy and to smell.
Another victim claimed he was innocent. The execution was stopped. Caligula ordered soldiers to cut out his tongue. Then they killed him. The emperor was often present, even dining during the ordeal. He also insisted the victims' families join him. One father pleaded that he was too ill to attend. Caligula sent a litter to his house to collect him. As Caligula indulged his sadism to the hilt, members of the Senate even found themselves ordered into the gladiators' ring.
The arena was a perfect place for Caligula to humiliate his Senate, because all of the citizen body would be there, watching and being watched.
Caligula was very much a sadist. He enjoyed, at the lightest, teasing people, and at the worst, actually torturing them. And this is a society which itself is extremely sadistic, a society which loved gladiatorial shows, wild beast hunts, the massacre of prisoners, and yet they were shocked by this man's behavior, partly, I suppose, because he was exercising his sadism on his fellow citizens. But it was itself, the ingenuity of it was shocking to them.
As Caligula's abuse of the Senate continued, shock turned to public unrest. Furious, he ordered the awnings of the theatre drawn back to punish the angry crowd. They roasted in the midday sun. As opposition escalated, so did the violence. Even close relatives came under attack. Claiming to have uncovered a conspiracy, Caligula exiled his surviving sisters and had his brother-in-law put to death. In the first 3 years, Caligula's impact was confined to Rome. By late 39 AD, he had raised his sights.
Caligula needed military success. He'd been brought up in the camp, but he'd never seen an army. And one of the most important functions of a Roman emperor was to be a general. That's what the word emperor ultimately means. And he had to live up to that.
Unlike his father Germanicus, Caligula was no soldier. But he believed he could exceed Germanicus's reputation and extend the empire into Britain. Caligula marched in comfort, accompanied by his troops and gladiators, crossing the German border early in 40 AD. After minor skirmishes, he fled in panic from an enemy attack. Now he switched his attention to Britain. What happened next defies military logic. On reaching the English Channel, Caligula set out to sea. But, as his biographer Dio reports, he promptly returned to shore.
He took his seat on a lofty platform and gave the soldiers the signal as if for battle, bidding the trumpeters urge them on. Then, all of a sudden, he ordered them to gather up the shells.
Caligula's elite forces picked up shells in their helmets. They were sent back to Rome for display as the spoils of victory over the ocean. His behavior remains a mystery. Certainly, his dreams of conquest had come to nothing. On returning to Rome, he tested the Senate's loyalty to the utmost, demanding they treat him as a god. Earlier emperors had been worshipped after death. Caligula was not prepared to wait.
Playing with the idea of being a god does seem to show a childlike idea of having everything now and everything before he's ever earned it.
He ordered a temple to be built to himself in the heart of Rome. Wealthy nobles, including his uncle Claudius, were forced to pay vast sums to join. By now, Caligula's irrational demands were threatening the stability of his empire. When he ordered his own statue to be placed in the Temple of Jerusalem, there was outrage in the Jewish population. It was the ultimate insult to the Jewish God. Fearing major riots, the local governor stalled, risking his own life. But before the statue was finished, the emperor was dead. Caligula had received dramatic proof that he was not divine. As he returned from the theatre on the 24th of January 41 AD, Caligula was stabbed to death. The assassins included members of his family and the Praetorian Guard assigned to protect him.
Caligula was killed because there was no other way to get rid of him, and no apparent end to the evils he was prepared to perpetrate. There was an ancient theory that if a man was evil enough, his soul was so corrupt, the only way you could cure him was to kill him.
The corpse was left with more than 30 wounds. His wife, Caesonia, was hunted down and stabbed. Drusilla, their 2-year-old daughter, was beaten to death against a wall.
The Roman world thought that it was relieved of a monster. The horror of what he'd done between the year he came to power and the moment of his assassination was astounding.
Convinced he too was on the hit list, Caligula's uncle Claudius was found shaking behind a curtain. To his amazement, he was marched to the Praetorian camp and acclaimed as emperor. Once again there was rejoicing in the Senate, and Caligula's statues were torn down.
Everything was done to obliterate his memory, and his successor Claudius actually referred to him as being out of his mind. I don't think that Caligula was out of his mind at all. This was a young man who was absolutely determined to use every freedom he had.
Caligula had reigned for just 3 years and 11 months.